Hello and welcome to this James the Bike Guy, where today we're getting a chance to take a look at the 2023 Trek Domane SL7. Now this is a brand new and revised Gen 4 variant of the Trek Domane Endurance road bike, and this one is spec'd out to the T with a Shimano Ultegra Di2 12-speed drivetrain. So in this video, we're going to go over the features and designs of this bike, talk about the changes and updates for 2023, go over the frame, check out the parts, but of course, we'll find out exactly what it weighs. So if this kind of thing's interesting, stick around and consider subscribing. All right, talking Trek Domane. So the Domane series has been around for quite some time, and what we're looking at here today is the 2023 variant and the Generation 4 of the bike. Now, when this bike first came out in its Generation 1 variant, it was an absolute mind blower of a bike at the time because it combined upright and comfortable endurance geometry with adding something called ISOSpeed. And ISOSpeed is a decoupler system to separate the seat tube from the rest of the frame so that you can keep a bike nice and stiff but allow some vertical compliance. Before that, most endurance bikes ended up using shaping to their frames and different designs to be able to soak up the bumps that took away some of the performance aspect of the endurance bike, and the Trek Domane really shook that up. Now, going into Generation 2 and 3, disc brakes became standard, and this new bike, the Gen 4 variant, builds on the last version by adding some more aerodynamic touches and reducing some weight. So speaking of which, coming from the Generation 3 bike, Gen 3 went to Trek's H2 geometry, which is their sporty but endurance geometry, a little bit more upright in the front end, a little bit shorter reach, but in Gen 1 and Gen 2, it was H3, which was even higher. Now, put that in perspective, H1.5 is what you get in, say, the Madone, their Aero race bikes. This is still more upright and comfortable geometry than the Madone. But for 2023, the frame geometry stayed the same as Gen 3, but what they've done is they've added the shaping to make it a bit more aerodynamic. Now, for Gen 3, you'll notice the seat tube and seat post is what's called a camtail design. That's where the back end is flat, and going around the front, it's a airfoil style shape. So that shaping allows it to work like a truncated airfoil and get much of the aero benefit of a traditional aero frame. And then up front, the tubing for that head tube is changed up, and they've integrated the cockpit where the cabling now comes in just underneath the stem into the frame and throughout. Now, Trek does not claim what the difference is in the aerodynamic performance, but they do say that it is an aerodynamic upgrade over the previous generation and that it also cleans up the aesthetics. At least that second part I know is true because the bike does look pretty clean. Now, the other thing that changed is Trek went to lose some weight. And compared to the Gen 3 version, this bike is 300 grams lighter. So the frame set comes in 300 grams lighter, so nearly 3/4 of a pound. And if you put that in comparison to Gen 1, this is now over 700 grams lighter. So in 4 generations, they've saved, nearly 2 pounds, or really 1.5 pounds of weight, which is pretty significant, while still adding things like frame storage into the bike, adding much bigger tubing, and the addition of much larger tires. Now, the bike for 2023, it comes with 700 by 32 millimeter tires, but clearance for up to 700 by 38 millimeters without fenders, and you can even sneak in a 700 by 35 with fenders. So this is really going to place the bike somewhere between that endurance frame geometry and what you'd get in a gravel bike. So if you were going to do a gravel adventure or 2 per year, but that's not really your style, you'd be able to use this bike with 38 mil tires, get through those events, but still be able to run on the much faster rolling 32s that come stock on the bike for just about everything else. Now, this frame is Trek's SL variant. So in the lineup from Trek, this frame is going to come in a AL, which is their aluminum Domane, SL, which is the mid-level carbon fiber frame with 500 series OCLV, and then they also have a top-end SLR. The SLR basically builds upon this bike with a lighter weight, fancier carbon fiber layup, but similar ride quality and the same geometry. Now, one difference is on the SLR, they make a race shop limited version, so an RSL, and that's going to be the race geometry of this bike. So say if you were wanting something more comfortable for your racing, you can do this bike in a race geometry, that H1.5 fit that comes on the Madone, as well as it saves an additional 100 grams because it gets rid of the frame storage. Now, frame storage to me seems like it's totally worth it. And on this SL flavor, it does come with it. And you'll see in the down tube, what we have here is a spot for a bits multi-tool. The cover comes off. Of course, your water bottle cage can mount on top. And then as we go into the frame, it's going to come out with a bits bag where you can roll up your tubes, your CO2s, tire levers, whatever else you might want to carry. And inside there, you now can see all the carbon on the inside. It's a pretty clean and good looking frame. And one lesser known benefit is, of course, now internally routed cabling is a bit easier. But if you take a quick look down inside, you see that little guy there? That is where the battery is going to be stored for our Di2 electronic shifting 12-speed drivetrain. And the electronic shifting drivetrain is pretty sweet because it can shift based on just pressing a couple of buttons up on the handlebar, as well as you can program it to synchro shift, meaning as you shift the rear derailleur, it will automatically shift the front derailleur high and low based on the gear ratio. So here, because this is a 2x12, we've got technically 24 speeds, but if you set it up with synchro, instead of having to shift your front derailleur and rear derailleur, so rear on this side, front on the other, you could set it up to where it all shifts just based on that rear derailleur, high and low. It's a pretty cool setup, but I also like that you can turn that off because in a lot of cases, you might want to control what's happening with that front drivetrain. Now, the Ultegra system, I look forward to getting into more in the future with a dedicated video, but I have spent some time on a couple of bikes that have had this Di2 12-speed drivetrain, and it is just a joy. Goes through the gears quite well. That 12-speed drivetrain gives us a much wider range, with this bike coming into the back with an 11 to 34 cassette. So that 34 drives forward to a crankset, which is operating a 50-34 chainring combination, meaning this bike has a 1-to-1 gear ratio at the low end with a 50 to help get more speed downhill, and the frame itself can fit up to a mid-compact 36-52 chainring combo. Now that crank is going through a threaded T47 bottom bracket, which is a nice durability upgrade for the Domane in 2023. So we're definitely happy to see that. And rolling down the road is via these Aeolus Pro 3V wheels. This is a carbon fiber, wider oriented aero wheel. It's laced up to through axle hubs in the front and the rear with a 12 by 100 millimeter up front and a 12 by 142 millimeter out back. Now, diving into the cockpit is the last real major thing to talk about, in which case you can see we've got an alloy handlebar that's mated up to this integrated stem and headset combo. So something that's kind of neat about this is while this setup is a aluminum bar and stem, they are totally separate, but you can see the cable routing comes in just below, allowing the cables to be aero, clean up the aesthetic, make it move a little bit faster through the wind, and then those go in through the headset bearings on the front end. Makes for a really clean look coming down to this front fork, and then of course as we roll backwards, this is going to be where one of the changes are for 23. That would be in the ISO-speed setup. So in Gen 1, the first generation of this bike came with ISO-speed just in the back. So that's a bearing system that decouples the seat post from the frame. In Gen 2 and Gen 3, they added ISO-speed to the front. But because this bike now has such wide tires, there's no need for the front ISO-speed, so they can save some weight, save some complexity, and keep the rear ISO-speed in a fixed position without adjustment to make sure that everything rides perfectly. Now, carbon seat post with a Verse saddle on top. Not my favorite saddle, but it does work out. And keep in mind, touch points like that are something that you can update yourself. Well, anyways, now that we've taken a look at all those features and designs of the bike, I think it's time to find out what this bike weighs. The actual weight of this Trek Domane in a size 60 centimeter is going to come in and weigh 20.10 pounds.